Good day, Suidlanders, and welcome to Suidlanders Week in Review, the Great Catch-Up Part 2. In Part 2, I'll continue to take you through a number of events of the past few months that I found so bewildering that I was completely perplexed and had to spend about 8 weeks fathoming the true meanings of those events and how to reconcile them, for better or for worse, to everything in which I believe. For instance, this is a terrific illustrating example. As I described to you last week, how can I possibly view the hostilities between the USA and China over Taiwan as genuine hostilities? Real mutual antagonism. If the US government and the Chinese government collaborated to cause the infernos in Hawaii and California in recent months, as appears to have been quite persuasively demonstrated by 2 recent documentaries, I want to say proved. On a similar theme, this week we'll discuss what appears suspiciously like happy coincidences in the actions of the ANC and the DA in this country. And that is said very much tongue-in-cheek, happy coincidences. Serendipity is the right word. However, before we do so, let's take a look at the gold and silver prices. I'm not going to go into too much detail because in this week's Werklikse Gebeure, Marius, Greyling and I went into lots of detail. So watch that video if you want to know more. Right now, gold is trading at $2,985 an ounce, and many future contracts for delivery are being priced at over $3,000 an ounce. It's a big breakthrough. What's more, the paper market is quiet. That means to say the trade in derivatives and speculative betting and what have you. And the physical market is thriving. In other words, people want gold, and they want physical gold delivered into their own hands and not into the custody of a secure storage facility. Silver is lagging far behind in price due to price suppression by what is known as spoof trading by big institutions in the USA. And if that sounds improbable to you, if you don't believe me, if you're not altogether sure that such conspiracy theories are true, if you don't believe me, try to buy some. I dare you. Demand has shot through the roof worldwide. So, if you can afford it and if you can find it, you'll probably never see the current prices again in your lifetime. For the record, the spot paper price of silver is $34, about $34 a troy ounce. It's up and down in that vicinity. Right at this very minute, it is $33.98. So $34 a troy ounce or 618 rand. But the physical retail price is more like 800 rand an ounce or well over $40 if you're lucky. And that just tells you everything you need to know. If you're not sure, if you're not an aficionado, if you don't watch other videos on this topic, if you're not sure whether I know what I'm talking about, whether Suidlanders has done the research, that tells you everything. I've just been on the website of the largest supplier in South Africa, and as I say, 800 rand an ounce, well over $40 an ounce if you're lucky. Right now, back to the mind-boggling, belief-shaking events of the past few months. In this part 2, we're going to take a look at 3 interrelated and overlapping pieces of legislation in South Africa, namely the Acts of Parliament, number 13 of 2024, the Expropriation Act, signed into law by the President on the 24th of January, and number 39 of 2024, the Preservation and Development of Land Act, signed into law sometime prior to the 27th of January, but only gazetted on the 29th. And the bill, in other words, it is a bill, it's not yet been made an Act of Parliament, and at best it can only complete the process of becoming an Act of Parliament in the second half of this year. We say that in the spirit of transparency and honesty. The Equitable Access to Land Bill. Right. The first thing to mention is that there's something sketchy about the dates of the first 2 acts. Firstly, we know that the President supposedly kept it a secret, or we're led to believe. He didn't tell anybody, didn't mention it to anybody in the cabinet, that he was going to sign into law, that's the final step in the South African legislative process. An Act of Parliament is not an, it's not an actionable act until the President has signed it off. But enough people knew that it was gazetted on the same day. And if that's not sketchy enough for you, the Preservation and Development of Land Act was supposedly signed into law, we're hearing, around about the same time, possibly the previous day. Now, I've gone and looked, and the 24th is certainly the day that is recorded in the Gazette. No two ways about it. I'm looking at it now. And it was reported as having happened on that day. That's quick motion. The preservation of rural land was reported on the 29th. Now, calendar-wise, those are 5 days apart. How is it that the Gazette could only gazette on the 29th? It was reported on the 27th, and we're hearing that in fact it probably happened well prior to the 27th. The 27th being a Monday, the 24th being a Friday, 23rd a Thursday. That's what got me smelling a rat first. I thought, well, why not the simple way? Why not the easy way? Why not the straightforward way where you don't have to look for explanations about why one thing gets kept a secret for however long, 5 days, another magically was kept a secret from the world, but was then published immediately, gazetted immediately. In years gone by, you could have said, well, the Gazette only comes out on a Friday, Simon, so it was only once every 7 days. Yes, but this is not every 7 days. And the two supposedly happened at about the same time. All right, let's leave that there. Maybe there's nothing to it. Maybe I'm searching too hard for ghosts. Right. Now we've got the Equitable Access to Land Act, or bill, I should say, going through the motions. The expropriation without compensation, I'll come back to the bill. Expropriation without compensation is going to have to be implemented under the aegis of the Department of Works. Now, we've mentioned to you previously that certain top people, good solid observers, are saying that a reading of the Act suggests, in its wording, that the number of authorities that would be entitled to determine that a property may be expropriated without compensation is about 400, over 400. Let's use 400 as our reference number, 400 and something. So little authorities all across South Africa. It's not going to be a nationally driven thing. However, it will take place under the aegis of the Department of Public Works, whose boss at the moment in the Government of National Unity is Dean McPherson. And he's saying, no way, not on my watch. This shall not happen. But it is already law. It has already been signed off. And it seems as if he's not going to have much say as a Democratic Alliance guy supposedly committed to property rights. If the feckless alcoholic mayor of Renosterfontein, Bergsig, determines that a certain piece of property may be expropriated. In theory, it's happening under the aegis of the Department of Public Works. But in practice, as an aside, I'm briefly going to read to you the South African Constitution, Chapter 2 of the Bill of Rights, Section 25, pertaining to property. 1. No one may be deprived of property except in terms of law of general application. That is to say, a law that pertains equally to everybody, not especially to whites or especially to to landowners or especially to anybody. And no law may permit arbitrary deprivation of property. We have in South Africa the Council for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration. What that means is, you're initially meant to, we all know that applies to workplace relationships, errors in the workplace, fault, law, firing, and so on. You're meant to endeavor to be conciliatory. First step. We all assume that that doesn't work, otherwise things wouldn't go the way that they do. But in theory, there should be conciliation first. If not, mediation. An interlocutor enters to try to mediate between the two parties, assuming, for the purpose of this example, in a labor dispute between employer and employee. Arbitration is the last step. Arbitration means roughly something like judgment. I'm the guy from the CCMA. I'm appointed to participate in this process. I endeavor to foster conciliation by both parties. It doesn't work. I endeavor to mediate. It doesn't work. In the end, I just arbitrate. So, no law may permit arbitrary deprivation of property, where somebody just says this property should or should not be taken. Property may be expropriated only in terms of law of general application. This is, now we've moved on to point 2. So they use that expression again, general application, for a public purpose or in the public interest, and B, subject to compensation, the amount of which and the time and manner of payment of which have either been agreed to by those affected or decided or approved by a court. Meaning that the entire act, the premise of the act, the very rudiments of the act are contrary to the law. And everybody knows it, but it has gone through Parliament and the President has signed it off. And the powers to implement it are arrogated to these 400 local authorities. So we know what that means. We know that there was a 19-year process in this country. And for 19 years, a process was carried out and completed whereby land restitution claims were addressed. I have never heard of a single complaint. Nowhere have I read in any media that a certain clan or tribe or family or kingdom was embittered by the unsuccessfulness of that process. Tens of millions of hectares were given back to supposedly the rightful owners through a successful and completed and very long and exhaustive process. We know also, to give a for instance, to illustrate this principle, that the Nongoma Trust, the trust of the Zulu Kingdom in KwaZulu-Natal, possesses about 32% of KwaZulu-Natal, mostly rural farmland on which millions upon millions of cattle and goats roam. 32%, not 3.2%. And that doesn't include any other farmland that was restored under that 19-year process to black people, clans, families, tribes, sub-tribes. It doesn't include any townships. Please excuse me giggling, but I'm from Amanzimtoti, south of Durban. I'm very familiar with Kwamashu, Kwamakuta. The list is long of enormous townships in that vicinity. It doesn't include any farms bought by black people and owned by black people, excluding Nongoma Trust, excluding the land restitution process, excluding townships, locations, excluding suburbs in which black people have bought houses, property, land. We talk now just of farms bought commercially in a normal process as you and I would go about doing so. So this whole thing is a questionable story on many levels. Now we'll come more to the point. The Preservation and Development of Land Act, number 39, I beg your pardon, on number 39 of 2024, was devised and brought through the process to the President's table to be signed on, who knows, the 23rd, the 24th, the 27th of January, by the Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, of the Democratic Alliance. And as one commentator said, what this comes down to is that the government shall from now on be the sole legal authority on who may do what with which land, what you may plant, what you may graze, and so on and so forth. And I thought to myself, besides the sketchy timing that initially alarmed me, how is it possible that the Democratic Alliance, of all people, would want to dictate how farmers use their land? And then it occurred to me. In early January of this year, or in December of last year, I believe early January, John Steenhuisen said that the DA remains fully committed to the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. So I went to look them up, and they're all dodgy. But here's this one. Goal 12, responsible consumption and production. So there's a little quotation, right? It reads this way. SDG 12 is to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. One of the indicators is the number of national policy instruments to promote sustainable consumption and production patterns. Another one is global fossil fuel subsidies and an increase in domestic recycling and a reduced reliance on the global plastic waste trade are other actions that might help meet the goal. So that's a little synopsis. But you know which part is the operative part for you and me. One of the indicators is the number, how many, of national policy instruments to promote sustainable consumption and production patterns. So you're only doing your job as a sketchy handshaker as somebody with one pants leg shorter than the other. If you've got lots and lots of laws that dictate how this stuff happens. Then we've got this equitable access to land thing. And basically what that comes down to is that 80% of the land should be in black hands. The land ownership should reflect the demographics of the country as a law. It's not yet an act of Parliament, much less signed off by the President as yet. But that's the plan. That they have the motive for the implementation of expropriation without compensation at local level. In this municipality, 80% of the land is not occupied or owned by black people. We're just going to have to expropriate. And whatever production is to take place on that land will be dictated by us. And it dawned on me, and it was a horrifying realization, if you like, apprehension, that we've been snookered by two parties who we believed were in opposition to one another. And they never were. They were working hand in hand all along. And it rocked my world in the worst possible way, as I've told you before, and as I said to Mr. Miller, I drifted around this house in a daze, trying to figure out what is what and who is who, and how does my belief system fit into any of this, and how do I carry out my job, knowing or grasping, as I do a little bit better now, that in fact all is not what it seems. The people are not who they seem to be. Enemy is not necessarily enemy. Opposition is not necessarily opposition. They're all batting for the same team, and it's not mine. I'm not up against 17 different enemies. I'm up against one with 17 different faces. Anyway, that's that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience in listening to this long catch-up video. We wish you everything of the very best for the very dark times that appear to lie ahead of us. May our Lord God bless and keep you and yours. Amen. Bye-bye.